And oh my god, this has just come in. Ozzy Osbourne has died, surrounded by love, at the age of 76. A statement from his family has just hit the wires. Very, very sad news. He was truly one of a kind, a legend and, by all accounts, a genuinely nice guy, in a moment that has shaken the music world to its core. Ozzy Osbourne, iconic rocker and cultural trailblazer, left behind a final message that no one was prepared for. Known for his wild persona and fearless defiance of convention, Ozzy's last words were neither loud nor chaotic. Instead, they were raw, vulnerable, and deeply human. Look, I don't get up in the morning and think I'm some kind of legend. I don't gripe. You keep moving. You're still moving, you're not dead. Hidden in those words is a truth that could forever reshape how the world remembers him. But what exactly did he mean? And why is this final revelation sending shockwaves through fans, family, and the entire music industry? This was never meant to be a quiet goodbye. I'm dying, that's the truth. I don't need a doctor to tell me what I already know. Those were Ozzy Osbourne's raw, unfiltered words, spoken with the clarity that only comes when time is short. It wasn't despair. It was acceptance. A man at peace with the inevitable, determined to face the end on his own terms. And he did. On July 5, 2025, something extraordinary happened in Birmingham, something that defied both medical expectations and public belief. Else, despite being nearly immobile after more than 2 decades battling Parkinson's disease and spending the last 6 months practically bedridden, Ozzy Osbourne forced himself onto the stage at Villa Park. It wasn't just a performance. It was a final act. "Thank you from the bottom of my heart," told the crowd. His voice cracking, his body frail, but his spirit unbroken. The audience didn't just cheer. They wept, because they knew this wasn't just a concert. It was a farewell. And just hours before his death, on July 22, 2025, something even more haunting happened. A moment that fans and loved ones will remember forever. From somewhere backstage, a quiet, dimly lit corner, far from the roar of the crowd, Ozzy Osbourne posted a photo to Instagram. No caption, no long farewell, just 2 words. Back to the beginning. For longtime fans of the Prince of Darkness, those words hit like thunder. It wasn't just a throwback. It was the name of his final show. Back to the beginning. But in hindsight, it wasn't about nostalgia. It was a message, carefully chosen, quietly delivered. Every move Ozzy made in his final weeks felt purposeful, planned, as if he was checking off a list that only he could see. The show's title, the unannounced Instagram post, the impossible appearance at Villa Park. None of it was random. It was Ozzy writing his own final chapter, not with chaos and fire, but with eerie, graceful precision. Fans began to piece it together. The quiet visits to old haunts, the one-on-one conversations. Behind closed doors, the subtle goodbyes buried. In interviews, and most of all the way he spoke, he wasn't holding on, he was letting go. And in his own wild, poetic way, he made sure we knew it too. But the mystery wasn't just in what he said, it was in how he said it. The man once defined by madness, mayhem, was suddenly still, reflective, almost gentle. Not a scream, but a whisper. Not a breakdown, but a message. And now, we're only beginning to understand what that message truly meant. So what did Ozzy Osbourne whisper in his final moments that turned silence into the loudest statement of his life? Stay with us. This story is still unfolding. The night Ozzy knew it was time for 6 long years, Ozzy Osbourne was mostly confined to a bed. His body, ravaged by Parkinson's disease, had lost the war for motion, balance, and independence. A fall in February had made things even worse, leaving him unable to stand without excruciating pain. But it never stole his voice, and it never touched his will. On July 5, 2025, against every medical expectation, against the quiet protests of friends and doctors alike, Ozzy Osbourne stood slowly, painfully, defiantly on the stage at Villa Park in Birmingham, not to say hello, but to say goodbye. And he didn't do it with sadness. He did it with fire. So why? Why did he push his body beyond its limits? Why walk onto that stage when every part of him was telling him not to? Because this wasn't a man seizing a moment. This was a man creating one. Behind the scenes. Sharon Osbourne had spent over a year pulling every string, making every call, orchestrating the logistics that would give her husband one last spotlight. But, make no mistake, it wasn't Sharon pushing Ozzy to perform. It was Ozzy pushing everyone else. Even when he couldn't walk, even when breathing left him winded, even when he could. Barely whispered, he insisted. The show must go on, because to fade away quietly would have felt like betrayal. Not to his fans, but to himself. The concert was called Back to the Beginning. And it wasn't just a clever title. It was a homecoming, for one night only. The original Black Sabbath lineup, the same for men who once flipped the music world upside down, reunited on stage, one final time. Over 40,000 fans packed the stadium in Birmingham, and another 5.8 million watched from around the world. Metallic, Guns N' Roses, Alice in Chains. Legends in their own right opened the show. The world wasn't tuning in for the openers, they came for him. Ozzy sat on a black leather throne, his legs too weak to stand. And when the lights hit, and the music began to roar, that voice hit. Voice still shook the earth. War Pigs, NIB, Iron Man, Paranoid each. Song thundered through the air like a final confession. Each lyric stitched one last thread between the man and the millions who had followed him through decades of chaos. Rebellion, glory, pain. But this night wasn't just about music. In true Ozzy fashion, even his final act gave back. Every dollar earned from the concert, an estimated $190 million, was donated to Birmingham Children's Hospital, Acorns Children's Hospice, and Parkinson's Research. It wasn't a PR stunt. It was a man settling his accounts, man giving everything he had left to those still fighting battles he knew too well. And then came the moment. The words. I just want to say to you on behalf of the guys in Black Sabbath, and myself, your support over the years has made this life possible. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. I love you. We love you. It wasn't just gratitude, it was closure, a farewell to the life that had given him everything, and slowly taken it all back. The final message, 17 days later. On July 22, 2025, Ozzy Osbourne was gone, but not before leaving one final message. One that, even now, fans and loved ones are still trying to decode. In the final hours of his life, Ozzy posted one last image to Instagram. It wasn't staged, wasn't dramatic. It was a quiet backstage photo from Back to the Beginning. His final concert. No filter, no caption. Just a man in shadow, moments after giving everything he had left. But it's what came before that made the post even more haunting. In an interview just weeks earlier, reflecting on his life and legacy, Ozzy was asked if he ever felt immortal. No. He said, I felt lucky to be alive. I feel lucky, said felt. A subtle shift, barely noticeable. But it meant everything. That wasn't just reflection, it was resignation. A quiet admission that his time was almost up, he had already made peace with it. When a legend starts saying goodbye, they don't always shout it, sometimes they whisper it, and if you're not listening closely, you miss it. But Ozzy made sure we heard him. In every song, in every word, in every pause, he was telling us something in that final post. It wasn't just a memory, it was a message. Back to the beginning. Maybe it meant more than we thought. Maybe it wasn't about where he'd come from. Maybe it was about where he was going. The end was never silence. It was the last verse of a song only Ozzy could write. And now, we're left to play it back. One final time. His final Instagram post said everything without saying much at all. No filter, no fanfare. It's just his name above a dressing room door and the words, Back to the Beginning. Like a simple throwback, a nod to where it all started. But in hindsight, felt more like a timestamp. The chapter closing, a man not afraid. Just ready in the weeks leading up to that final night. Everything Ozzy did felt ... intentional there. Were no cameras, no press tours, no grand send dash off, Just time quiet. Deliberate time with the people who mattered most. He made sure to be with each of his 6 children. No long speeches. No dramatic goodbyes, just presence. Meals shared, jokes retold, laughter echoing through. Rooms where the past and present briefly stood still. Stories that had been told 1,000 times were told again as every word now carried a little more weight. He hugged his grandchildren a little longer. He called old friends just to check in, and for those paying close attention, there was a strange, peaceful finality to it all. Not sadness. Clarity. A father's final gift then. There was Kelly's daughter. And perhaps the one who understood him most deeply, just moments after the Back to the Beginning show on July 5th. Something unexpected unfolded behind the curtain. Sid Wilson, longtime friend and partner to Kelly, posed. It was emotional. It felt spontaneous. But it wasn't. Ozzy had helped set the stage for it. He knew he wouldn't be around to walk her down the aisle, but he could be there when it all began. That moment meant everything to him. The photos from that night, kept private until after his death, tell a story words can't. Ozzy in his black coat, sitting slightly slouched, tired, worn, but glowing, not from the show, not from the crowd, but from watching his daughter cry tears of happiness just a few feet away. His smile wasn't loud, it was content, not fading. Finishing in those final days. Ozzy wasn't fading, he was finishing, piece by piece, word by word, memory by memory. This wasn't a man caught off guard by mortality. This was someone who had stared death down for years, laughed in its face, and then calmly looked it in the eye. Chose the moment to let go when the world stopped, and when he finally did. In the morning of July 22nd, 2025, the world didn't just react, it froze. Social feeds darkened. Music pages slowed to a hush-top comment. Sections across Ozzy Osbourne's posts became digital shrines, glowing with love, grief and gratitude from every corner of the globe. People didn't scroll past. They paused, they wept, they remembered. Thank you for the music, guy. May you rest in peace. You were the soundtrack to my entire childhood. Love you always. Ozzy Osbourne was never just a rock star, he was a force of nature, a voice of rebellion, soul filled with both madness and meaning. And in the end, the Prince of Darkness didn't go out in fire and fury. He left us with grace, precision, and one final gift. A goodbye that felt like a love letter. Back to the beginning. The words came flooding in, not just likes, not just reposts, but real aching gratitude. Ozzy's final Instagram posts, especially the now iconic backstage photo captioned simply "Back to the Beginning," became sacred space, a digital shrine. Fans didn't just comment, they spoke to him. As if somewhere, somehow, Ozzy was still listening, and it wasn't just the fans. The stars came out to not to be seen, but to say goodbye. Adam Sandler, raw and nostalgic, wrote on X, whether we were in our basement with our brothers, in the woods with our buddies, in the car, at a keg party, on a boat, at football practice, at a sleepover, nobody was more badass to crank up than the one and only Prince of Darkness. Osbourne. It wasn't just a tribute, it was a timestamp. A reminder of just how far Ozzy's voice had traveled into homes, into memories, into the lives of people who never met him, yet felt like they had. Jason Momoa didn't just post a memory, he had been there. On stage at Villa Park in Birmingham, I stood just feet away as Ozzy gave his final performance. He had hosted that legendary night. He posted a photo. Jason in black, Ozzy seated on his throne, both bathed in the golden light of a spotlight made for legends. Love you, Ozzy Osbourne. All my aloha, Sharon and Ohana. So grateful, Rip. There was no overstatement. No theatrics. It didn't need it. The weight was in the silence behind the words. When a titan, falls, Hollywood paused. The music industry stood still. Generations of artists froze mid-note. Because when someone like Ozzy leaves the world, you feel it. Not just in the headlines. In the air. The kind of emptiness that doesn't just echo through studios and stages, but through time itself. This was a man who had howled into microphones, with demons in his throat, and still, somehow, left fans feeling safer, stronger, louder. Ozzy's music wasn't just heard, it was lived. And now, the world was trying to live without it. But even in death, Ozzy wasn't silent. His final messages through lyrics, through that concert, through the gentle choreography of his quiet goodbyes were still rippling across the globe. From garage bands to Grammy winners, everyone was listening. The question that remains, so how do you explain a man who turned chaos into legacy? Who made silence louder than any scream? Who stared down death not with fear but with intention? You don't. You feel it. Because when a titan like Ozzy Osbourne falls, the world of rock doesn't just lose a voice, it loses part of its soul. The news didn't just break, it broke hearts. We have breaking news coming in now. Ozzy Osbourne, the heavy metal legend known as the Prince of Darkness, the godfather of metal, frontman of Black Sabbath, has died at the age of 76. It wasn't just fans who mourned, it was an entire culture, left staggering and unsure how to fill the silence he left behind. But maybe that's the point. Maybe Ozzy didn't want that silence filled. Maybe he wanted us to hear it loud and clear. To remind us that legacy isn't just what you leave behind, it's what echoes long after you're gone. Thank you for the music. You were the soundtrack to my entire childhood. Love you always. Back to the beginning. Back to where it all started. And now, finally, at peace. As tributes poured in, they weren't flashy, they were real. And that's exactly how Ozzy would have wanted it. Henry Rollins, the relentless voice of Black Flag, didn't need many words. He was genuine in that. Besides, the immense talent is his most enduring quality. It wasn't a rehearsed statement, it was raw, honest, like Ozzy. Dave Mustaine of Megadeth posted an old photo, just the two of them, side by side. Mustaine wasn't smiling like a peer. He looked like a fan. His words were quiet, reverent. Thank you for everything you've done for us all. See you on the other side. Hey. They weren't just saying goodbye. They were acknowledging that something in rock itself had shifted. A loud howling, guitar-scorching part of it had gone still. Alice Cooper, never one for soft sentiment, spoke to the Hollywood Reporter. Even he sounded shaken. He was, and will always be, a rock and roll legend. This isn't just losing a friend. Rock and roll is a family, a fraternity, and when we lose one of our own, it bleeds. A titanic boulder has crashed. But rock will roll on. Even beyond the metal community, the grief echoed. Elton John, a world away in genre, but not in spirit, shared a photo on Instagram, he and Ozzy. Mid-laugh, Ozzy's grin mischievous as ever. He was a dear friend and a huge trailblazer, who secured his place in the pantheon of rock gods. True legend. Also one of the funniest people I've ever met. Because that's what many forget, Ozzy wasn't just wild, he was warm, funny. Human. Behind the darkness and decibels stood a husband, a father, and a grandfather who loved deeply and lived fiercely. Sharon stood beside him through every storm, stage and off, and his children from two different relationships were constants in his life, always nearby, always watching, always loving. In 2023, Kelly Osbourne posted a snapshot that now feels sacred. Ozzy, surrounded by those who loved him, his eyes tired, his expression peaceful. We are always the best versions of ourselves when we are together. I love my family. So much it hurts, Dad. You were the other project manager in my pod. I love you to the moon and back. It wasn't curated. It wasn't posed. It was a daughter. It's quietly watching her hero grow quieter and holding on while she still could. The thunder that remains, because when legends leave, they don't simply disappear into darkness. They resonate. They echo like thunder after the storm. They leave more than memories. They leave questions, unfinished sentences, a silence that isn't empty but charged. It hums with the weight of everything they were, everything they gave, everything they meant. Ozzy's voice lives on in those echoes, and the artists who followed him, and the fans who never stopped listening, and in the family knew him not as a god but as a man. The final masterpiece. So, what was Ozzy Osbourne really trying to tell us in his final act? Maybe we'll never fully understand. Or maybe we already do somewhere deep, a place that doesn't need words. Ozzy Osbourne didn't just live a life of madness and metal, he composed it. Like a symphony, and when it came time to write his final movement, it wasn't rushed, it wasn't improvised, it wasn't chaotic. It was precise, painfully, beautiful, and entirely on his own terms. On July 22, 2025, the Prince of Darkness passed peacefully, surrounded by love. Just 17 days earlier, the man who could no longer walk due to the ravages of Parkinson's disease had performed his final show back to the beginning seated on his throne, performing 9 songs with a soul that still roared. His body had grown still, but his music, his legacy, it never will. It felt like a curtain lowering after the final note of a performance that had been building for 50 years. Because Ozzy, always the showman, always the craftsman, hadn't just accepted his fate, he had orchestrated it. When he stood on that stage at Villa Park earlier in July, it wasn't just a concert, it was a finale, a man writing the last chapter of his life with the kind of intention that only comes from knowing exactly what you're doing. And when the last song faded, he didn't promise a return. He didn't tease another tour. He simply said, "That's good night." Not, "See you next time." Not, "I'll be back." Just good night. Final, complete, intentional. The phrase carried an eerie stillness, like the house lights coming up after a standing ovation. The crowd didn't just cheer, they understood, somewhere deep down. They knew, and Ozzy knew they knew. A masterpiece of stillness. The days that followed didn't feel like the chaotic aftermath of a sudden tragedy. They felt like the closing of a well-loved book, a story that had always been hurtling toward this final page. Tributes poured in from every corner of music and culture: Metallica, Guns N' Roses, Elton John, Alice Cooper, and more. But beneath the emotion, there was something more haunting. Order. There was no scrambling for statements, no rushed memorials, no confusion. The Osbourne family released a message that didn't feel reactive. It felt ready, not cold, but calm, like a family that had been given a rare gift: time, preparation, closure. Kelly's engagement, which happened just minutes after his final show. Not a coincidence. The $190 million in charitable donations? Not an afterthought. His final Instagram post, just a quiet photo with the words "back to the beginning," not random. Every moment, every move, every goodbye had been mapped the way he did it. Ozzy used to joke, "I'm not Sinatra, I'll do it my way, I'm just Ozzy Osbourne, always will be." But in the end, he did do it his way. Not by raging into the night, but by welcoming it, like an old friend. Unafraid, unshaken, unapologetic ally, self. What made his exit so powerful wasn't just the control, it was the intention. The madman of metal, the icon who bit the head off a bat, the voice of chaos, the face of rebellion. He did something no one expected. He mastered stillness. The final act, his voice will never fade. Songs like Iron Man, War Pigs, and Crazy Train will echo across generations. His footprint in music, television, and culture itself remains indelible. But maybe the most remarkable part of his legacy is this: when the world expected one more act of madness, Ozzy gave us a masterpiece. Not just a death, a statement, a final act of intelligence, tenderness, and grace. For those who watched closely, who connected the dots of his final weeks, who listened between the lines, one truth rose to the surface. The wildest thing Ozzy Osbourne ever did, was leaving us without chaos. What do you think? So we ask you, What made Ozzy Osbourne, rock's wildest rebel, turn his final days into a perfectly crafted farewell? Was it love? Legacy? A final message we're only beginning to understand? Tell us what you think in the comments. And if Ozzy meant something to you like he did to millions around the world, don't forget to like, share and subscribe. Because legends never truly go silent. They just fade into echoes that keep us listening.